whenever you are. Good morning. Morning. On the record in case number 2022-00262, electronic application of Pine Grove Solar LLC for a certificate of construction for an approximately 50 megawatt merchant electric solar generating facility in Madison County, Kentucky, pursuant to KRS 278-700 and 807 KAR 5110. My name is Kent Chandler. I'm chairman of the Kentucky Public Service Commission and serve as chair of the Kentucky State Board on Electric Generation Transmission Siting. Joining me in person today are Vice Chair of the Kentucky Public Service Commission, Angie Hatton, and Commissioner Mary Pat Regan. The other siting board members that are in attendance today are John Lyons, Deputy Secretary of the Energy and Environment Cabinet, as proxy for Secretary Rebecca Goodman, Cindy Montgomery, Executive Advisor to the Cabinet for Economic Development, serving as proxy for Cabinet Secretary Jeff Knoll, and Bert Thomas, first ad hoc appointee. Before we get started in earnest, I would ask that anyone that is online, please make sure that your microphone and video are, or that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. I'd ask everybody in the room to please turn off or silence their cell phones. Note that Mr. Thomas, Mr. Montgomery, and Mr. Lyons, if you will let us know if you have technological issues that keep you from participating, that you just let us know. We'll take a break and make sure that we get you back on. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence in this case. It's my understanding, well, I want to check here. It's my understanding that public notice has been filed with the record. Is that right, Ms. Price?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Well, before we do public comment, we'll go ahead and do an entry of appearance of counsel for the applicant.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Rebecca Price and Jim Gardner on behalf of Pine Grove Solar.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And for siting board staff?
Heather Temple.
All right. I was handed as I walked in this morning a witness list, Ms. Price, with 6 witnesses and, well, with 8 individuals, 6 defined witnesses. Do you plan on calling the initial 6?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and the 2, Colin Chernowitz and Rob Young, are available if needed.
Okay, in person?
All in person.
Okay. And then is this the order in which you intend to call the witnesses?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. All right. And since they're not virtual, we'll go ahead and let you call them individually instead of telling us today who they are in the room. It's my understanding that pursuant to public notice, the Public Service Commission website has had on the main page the information available for folks to sign up to provide remote public comments. As of this morning, I haven't seen anything indicated that anyone has signed up to provide those public comments. At this point, I would ask if there's anybody in the room not involved with the applicant that would like to provide public comment for the siting board's consideration. Okay. Seeing none, I just remind anyone who is watching this live or prior to the submission of the case that public comment can be filed any time. There are 3 ways to provide public comment. The first is through our website at psc.ky.gov. The second is through email, in which you can send an email to a specific Public Service Commission comment email address, psc.comment@ky.gov, or you can mail public comments to the Public Service Commission at 211 Sower, S-O-W-E-R, Boulevard, 40602. We'd ask that whichever way you provide your public comments, that you include your name, your address, and the case number, which in this matter is case number 2022-00262. All right. Ms. Price, is there anything else that we need to take up before the presentation of witnesses?
Nothing on our end.
You'd like to call your first witness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Pine Grove Solar will call Madeline Ray.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Madeline Ray. My address is 1006 Blenheim Avenue, Charlottesville, Virginia, 22902.
Ms. Price?
And Ms. Ray, if you just speak up a little bit so
Okay.
the microphone picks you up. By whom are you employed,
I'm employed by AES Corporation,
and what is your title?
Senior Analyst of Permitting.
And can you tell the siting board what your involvement is with this project?
Yes, I oversee the permitting applications for the project of any sort, environmental, federal, state, etc.
Okay. And did you sponsor responses to requests for information in this case?
I did.
And do you adopt those responses today as your testimony?
I do.
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for this witness.
Counsel?
Thank you. Ms. Wright, if any of these questions are better directed at someone else, just let me know and I'll reserve them for another witness.
Okay.
So first, I kind of wanted to talk about the site just a little bit. In the site assessment report, we were provided attachment B, which is the site layout. Is that still the most recent site plan? Has anything changed?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yes, it is the most recent.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. And do you anticipate that will be the final site plan or without any major changes, I guess?
We don't anticipate any substantial changes. There will probably be design refinement from this point forward. Right now, we're sitting at about what we refer to as 30% design.
Okay, and was this site plan also approved as part of the conditional use permitting? It's the same one that was submitted?
That's correct.
Okay. And I just want to confirm, because sometimes it was, there's some different numbers. It is 486 total acres for the project?
I don't have it exactly in front of me, so I will direct that question or David can answer. I don't know
Okay,
exactly that
that's
works.
fine. I can-
Okay.
I can answer that.
Okay. And then, would you be the correct person to talk about the landscape planning, vegetative screening? Or would that be better?
Yes,
Okay.
in general.
So the only official landscape plan was in that site plan, and it just showed some small areas around the perimeter. Could you please explain that plan in some more detail, including how did you all choose what areas were going to receive that screening and the types of plants, things like that?
Yeah, of course. So, our company has developed and built many solar projects, and typically the way that we approach impact to visual assessment or screening of projects is that all surrounding residents and public roadways will be screened using vegetative buffers. Typically, we select fast-growing conifer species that are native or suited for the landscape that will grow quickly and will establish themselves well from once planted. And that plan can be anywhere from, I believe it's typically about 15 feet in depth of plantings, sometimes up to 20 depending on the needs of the area. And that will protect, or rather buffer, residents that are directly adjacent to the property and then from public roadways.
And when you say residents that are adjacent, is that just non-participating residences, or does that also include participating?
It typically includes non-participating, but it can include participating depending on what the circumstances of the layout are.
And you said they were fast-growing, so when exactly do you all plant those? Is it, at the beginning, in the middle, or is it at the very end of the site development?
I believe the witness later on, Josh O'Connor, can probably
Okay.
speak a little more clearly to this, but it's my understanding that we plant once construction is to a place where the plants will not be damaged. So not right at the beginning, because there's a risk that they will be disturbed or run over when vehicles are moving in and out of the property.
Okay. And have you all had any conversations with any non-participating landowners and specific requests for specific screening?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Excuse me. And in that conditional use permit, it does have some landscaping conditions. It says that whether or not screening is necessary in an area is determined by the Madison County Planning and Development Director. So in this landscape screening plan that is in the site plan, has that already been approved by them, or does that still have to occur when the construction is occurring, I guess?
I would direct this question to David Simpson, but it's my understanding that we will provide a final site plan to the county for
Okay.
approval.
And then also that permit, when it talks about the vegetative requirements, it says that underneath of the panels, there must be vegetation and not gravel. Has that ground cover already been determined?
And you mean with regards to the seed mix or?
Yes, or, yes.
We always use a native seed mix that will grow in depending on the soil conditions. But I don't believe that specifically has been selected at this point in time.
Okay. And the permit also indicated that some gravel is permitted for roadways and drainage. And so I assume that will be done for runoff purposes.
Yes, best
And
best
so
management practices.
Does that have to get approved through the county permitting process as well, or?
Yes, those details will be included in the final site plan.
Okay. There were some questions in the data request, and then when the site visit occurred about the intersection of Brassfield Road and Pine Grove Road, that would potentially need some improvements for construction traffic. Has any studies been completed or any engineering work or anything to determine what kind of upgrades are needed for that intersection?
I would direct this question to our traffic expert,
Okay.
Joshua O'Connor.
And then I have a few questions about karst. I'm assuming those would be better for,
Yes, probably Joshua O'Connor
okay.
as well.
And then provided in the application, there was a biological resources and technical memo completed by Tetra Tech. I don't really have any questions about the memo, but some of the recommendations that they were made about coordinating with U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Yes.
Do you know, has that happened, or what is the status of that?
At this point in time, we haven't initiated coordination with any federal agencies for either the United States Army Corps of Engineers or the United States Fish and Wildlife Service due to the status of the project. We're just not at that stage yet. But we will be coordinating with them when the time comes. I would like to amend my answer. We did submit a preliminary jurisdictional determination request to the Army Corps of Engineers, which has not been completed yet.
And then I have some questions about the transmission line. Would those be best for you or for a different witness?
A different witness,
Okay.
probably Josh O'Connor or Colin Chernowitz.
Okay.
What was it?
Rob Young.
Or Rob Young, oh, excuse me, sorry. Forgot Rob was here.
Okay. And then the project is Pine Grove Solar, but you work for AES, so who actually will employ the individuals that will be doing the work on the project?
So Pine Grove Solar is a subsidiary of the AES Corporation. So the employees are from the AES Corporation or AES Clean Energy, and then the Pine Grove Solar is a subsidiary of that.
Has any power purchase agreement been executed at this point?
I would direct this question to David Stimson.
Okay. And then I have questions about the setbacks.
I would probably direct those questions also to David Stimson.
Okay. Could you go over some of the community outreach and involvement that occurred for the project?
Yes, just in general?
Yeah.
Okay, so the project conducted a public open house in which we held 2 separate times for community members and residents. We sent letters inviting them to come ask their questions. We presented the layout of the proposed layout of the project that was preliminary at that point in time, spoke to many residents about their concerns, their questions about how the project was situated, where it was located, general impact questions, and in addition, we held through the conditional use permit process, we had a public hearing with Madison County, and where people were able to speak and directly ask questions to project representatives. And then we've also sent the various notices to adjacent landowners about the project and the process with the Public Service Commission and those various times of notice.
And I know that you all have already received the conditional use permit, but has there been any complaints or concerns or issues raised by anyone who lives around the property but is not involved with the property?
Through the conditional use permit application process and at the public hearing, there were a few adjacent residents that were concerned about property values. The project feels that we were able to answer those and provided a third-party report regarding property value impact. And then I believe there were a handful of concerns about construction noise. And again, we were able to discuss the duration of the construction and the impacts of that with them and ease some of those concerns.
Okay. And that kind of leads to the next question. How long do you believe construction will last?
I would direct this question to Josh O'Connor.
Okay. And any questions about kind of the pile driving and things like that? Would that be better for Mr. O'Connor as well?
That will actually be for our noise expert, Chris Hulick.
Okay. And then what about decommissioning?
I can answer some questions
Okay.
about decommissioning.
So in the site assessment report, a decommissioning plan was provided. Do you believe that is the final decommissioning plan?
No. When the final site plan is produced to Kentucky or Madison County, we will also provide an updated decommissioning plan that will reflect any sort of changes that occurred in the design.
And what kind of things do you expect might change, I guess, from the one that was provided, and what would be the final?
These would be minor changes such as the number of panels, if we were to select a different panel producer or inverter manufacturer, things of that nature. Once those details are finalized, they'll be included in the final decommissioning plan.
And in that plan, it said that it would be decommissioned to 4 feet in depth. Is that correct? Well, anything lower than 4 feet would be left in the ground.
Yes, I believe with the exception of the the racking system, they are driven to a depth of 12 to 14 feet. It's my understanding, another witness could probably correct or clarify that statement, but all of the racking steel will be removed.
And so, aside from the racking system, anything lower than 4 feet, the decommissioning plan is to leave that remaining?
Yes, sort of. The access roads will be, we'll consult with the landowner and determine if they want them to be remained or not. But I will direct the rest of that question or any clarifying questions with that to Josh O'Connor or Colin Chernowitz.
I don't believe I have any more questions for Ms. Ray.
Okay.
Deputy Secretary, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and maybe this should be directed to someone else, I'm not sure, but.
And Deputy Secretary, so Deputy Secretary, we can hear you fine when you're facing the camera, but when you turn over your shoulder, it's hard to hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I wanted to get some clarification on a couple of things, and maybe this should be directed to others, but I'm not sure. Will there be tree clearing during the project construction?
Yes, there is minor tree clearing for the project. There is a line of trees down the middle of the agricultural field. Not the entire line will not be removed. And then at this time, I believe there is a small amount of marginal clearing at the edges of the forested areas around the surrounding edges of the project site.
Okay. Obviously, that question is tied to the consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife with the clearance letter. So I just wanted to clarify that. I know Tetra Tech had indicated that something could be possible, but it wasn't clear whether it would be or not. The other question is also threatened and endangered species related, and if it should be directed to somebody else, that's fine as well. Again, it's tied to consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, but one particular species, the Short's bladderpod flowering plant that's federally threatened, has suitable habitat on the project site, and it was recommended by your consultant that a biologist go out and check for that plant during the flowering season, which is between now and May. Is there a plan for that to occur while this window, because this window is very short, obviously?
Yes, that's correct. We will have a presence-absence survey conducted for Short's bladderpod. And then in addition, I think you were alluding to it, but we will be able to coordinate this project with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to limit the impact to the gray bat, the Indiana bat, and the northern long-eared bat, and the Virginia brown bat. And those species have a seasonal time of year clearing window that we will abide by and manage that coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
All right, thank you for that additional information. I do have, you said Josh O'Connor would be answering Karst's question?
About what topic, sir?
Karst question?
Oh, yes, Karst. Sorry, yes, that would be Josh O'Connor.
Okay, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Montgomery?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Ray. I just have a few questions. The first question is do you know if there is a pilot agreement or IRB agreement entered into between or with the county?
I would direct this question to David Stimson.
Okay, perfect. And then secondly, do you know if there has been any discussion with local emergency management? Emergency management
I will direct this question to David Stimson, but I can say in general, yes, we do coordinate with the local emergency services prior to the operation of the project.
Perfect. And this question might be directed for someone else, but in attachment F, your outreach meeting documentation, there's a section that refers to the economic benefits. Do you know if those numbers were generated by the consultant's report, or if not, where the data comes from?
Yes, I would direct this question to Dr. Paul Coombs, who's also here as a witness.
Perfect. That's all the questions I have for this witness, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas, do you have any questions?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Vice Chair, do you have any questions?
Yes, just one. I read some of the expectations about decommissioning. Do we know when decommissioning will be expected? Do you project that in advance?
Yeah, so the typical lifespan of a project is about 35 years. So that at that time when decommissioning will be assessed.
Thank you.
Commissioner? The applicant in this case is Pine Grove Solar LLC, is that correct?
Correct.
As an LLC, do you know who the members of Pine Grove Solar are?
I would direct this question to either our legal counsel or David Stimson.
So you don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. Who are the employees of Pine Grove Solar LLC?
I don't believe that the LLC has any employees.
As part of the application, Pine Grove Solar noted that neither Pine Grove Solar nor any entity with ownership interest in the project has violated any state or federal environmental laws or regulations, and that there are no pending actions against Pine Grove Solar nor any entity with ownership interest in the project. Do you know who is responsible for that declaration?
Our internal legal counsel.
Okay. Do you know anyone that's here today as a witness that can attest to the veracity of that statement?
I don't
Mr.
know.
Chairman, that statement was signed and notarized, so Pine Grove Solar submits that it speaks for itself.
So
in terms
that,
of
the
veracity.
document is not signed and notarized. It's a single listed application. And that document has no oath or verification. As part of that document are you referring to an oath of verification filed generally with the application?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but we would be happy to.
Do you know who the witness was that?
The name of the internal AES legal counsel is escaping me, but we'd be happy to submit some sort of verification of that as a post-hearing data request.
Well, I appreciate that's the case, but I've got questions about it today. So do you have any witnesses that you're aware of today that can speak to the basis of the statement?
We do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so the entirety of the confirmation of all of those filing requirements regarding the site assessment report, the effect on local and regional economics, all of those compliance statements with the filing requirements, you don't have witnesses that can verify that's the case.
Not specifically, Mr. Chairman. We have submitted with the application, Attachment D, a statement regarding certifications signed by Teresa Carroll, and that is our verification of that.
But Teresa Carroll is not a witness. Is that correct?
She's not here today, no.
Okay. All right, thank you. Who is Sustainable Property Holdings LLC?
I would direct this question to our David Simpson.
You don't know the answer?
I don't.
Okay. Are you aware of whether or not the applicant has assigned to it or in its name leases for the property at issue?
I know that they exist. Is that what I'm sorry, do I understand the question correctly?
Yeah, you think that there are legal documents that name Pine Solar LLC as being the entity that has the right to develop the property?
That's correct.
Okay, so there have been assignments of leases from Sustainable Property Holdings LLC to the applicant?
That's correct.
Do you know whether those have been filed in this case?
I believe that, I don't know the answer.
Okay. Is Mr. Stimson the person?
I believe so.
The CUP, do you believe the CUP is in this record?
It is.
Okay. And the CUP requires, a conditional use permit requires the removal of underground facilities up to 3 feet. I get, given your response about the pile, the piling. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the decommissioning plan, do you have a copy of that decommissioning plan?
I do, but I left it over on my table.
That's okay. Counsel, would you mind to hand the witness a
That
copy of
was
the
staff.
decommissioning plan?
Okay, great. Okay,
On the second page of it's the third page of the PDF, third page of the document, it starts off introduction. Do you see that?
yeah, I think this is actually
Oh,
not
that's-
quite the right one. Thanks. Sorry about that. Okay, introduction?
On the third page, you see introductions at the top.
Yes,
So one of the, or the first major construction activity listed halfway down the page is cable trenching.
that's correct.
And so just tell me if I read what's wrong, if what I read here is what the document you have. It says cable trenching, electrical cables and telecommunication lines would require installation of a trench up to approximately 3 feet deep and 1 to 4 feet wide. The trenches would be filled with base material above and below the conductors and communications lines to ensure thermal conductivity and electrical insulating characteristics. The topsoil, and it goes on and on and on. Couple of questions about this cable trenching. The electrical cables and telecommunications cables, are they located directly on this, I want to use the right term, on the base material, or are they located inside conduit, which is placed on the base material?
Inside conduit is my understanding,
All right.
but if there's clarifying questions, I believe Josh O'Connor can answer them.
Yeah, and I think that's the big part. What I want to really ask about is that electrical conduit, do you anticipate it being placed below the depth in which the CUP requires it be removed?
No, I think I understand what the question is driving at, which is that all cable trenching will be removed as part of decommissioning.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the depth of the included in the CUP is intended to ensure that all electrical conduit is removed?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay. And is that based on that understanding, is that your all's intent? Is
Yes.
that all electrical conduit is removed?
That's correct, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Is that consistent across the projects that you all have? I mean, you all built 450 or in development of 450. The anticipation is that upon decommissioning, all underground conduit and electrical and telecommunications wires should be removed?
That's correct.
The steel racking structures, those racking posts, is it anticipated that those will have concrete foundations or be directly driven into the ground?
It's my understanding that they are directly driven into the ground and only require concrete footing in very special circumstances.
Okay, in the event that the concrete footing is in excess of 4 feet, do you know if that's addressed under the CUP?
I don't think I can answer that question. I would direct it to Josh O'Connor. But in general, our intent is to remove all major project components.
Okay. That the intent is the 4 feet addresses all major components, is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. Does the CUP have a bond obligation or requirement for the applicant?
I believe it does.
Okay. Do you know what that obligation is?
I would direct this question to David Stimson. I don't have it directly in front of me or recall the specifics.
You all have bonding obligations in other jurisdictions that you
Yes, always.
always?
Almost always.
Okay.
I would say almost always. Do you need this back?
Could approach witness.
You may.
Great. Just to clarify my earlier statement, the Pine Grove Solar will provide a bond ensuring decommissioning of the site under the proposed requirements, and the beneficiary of the said bond shall be, and then, if leased, there will be a dual beneficiary between the property owner and Madison County Fiscal Court. In the event that the property owner fails to reclaim the property to pre-construction condition, Madison County Fiscal Court shall have the sole authority to execute the bond for the purposes of reclaiming the property to pre-construction condition.
And where is that located? In the CUP?
That's in the conditional use application, or, conditions.
Do you mind to pull out that decommissioning plan one more time?
Sure.
And go to the final 2 pages of it?
Sure?
So first, page 14, you see at the bottom, total decommissioning cost?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see that it's approximately $2.5 million, the cost to decommission the facility?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next page, it has a salvage value, which is approximately 1/5 of the decommissioning cost?
Yeah, $423,000.
Okay. This is not your first project you've been involved in, is that right?
That's correct.
Is that pretty consistent with your experience? Is that the salvage value is significantly less than the decommissioning expense?
Yes.
Okay. And just be said differently, the cost of decommission is not entirely offset by the salvage of the materials that are decommissioned, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so you fully expect that the decommissioning bond will be some positive number? It's not gonna be a $0 bond because you can make more money from
Correct.
breaking down the facility than you could building it?
Correct. There will be, the bond will encompass the total cost of decommissioning.
Okay, and then I'm gonna ask each individual that's identified as being from AES this question, but do you work for AES proper, or do you work from a subsidiary of AES?
I work for AES Clean Energy.
Okay. Okay, and do you know where in the AES family AES Clean Energy falls? Like what it's a subsidiary of?
I don't know that I can answer the specific, like, nesting details.
Okay, all right. Ms. Price? You have any redirect to the witness?
Nothing for this witness.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. You may step down.
Thank you.
Would you declare your next witness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We would call Joshua O'Connor.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, please have a seat.
Thank you.
State your name and address for the record.
My name is Joshua O'Connor. I reside at 1701 Main Street, Delancey, New York.
Mrs. Price, you may ask.
Mr. O'Connor, by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by AES Clean Energy.
And what is your title?
My title is Senior Civil Engineering Expert Manager.
And can you tell the siting board what your involvement in this project is?
My involvement is to provide general civil engineering oversight, quality assurance, quality control, and general guidance as it pertains to construction means, methods, and practices.
Okay. Did you sponsor responses to requests for information in this case?
I did, yes.
And do you adopt those responses today as your testimony?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Counsel?
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, I think I have down which questions were for you and which questions were for Mr. Stinson, but if I get them wrong, please let me know and we'll
Okay,
defer
thank you.
them again. I believe it was deferred to you about the total size of the project. About how
Yeah.
many, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I believe Mr. Stimson can
Okay,
better answer that
I'm
question.
sorry.
Thank you.
And then are you the one who will fill in some details about the landscaping and vegetation and how that will be done?
To the best of my ability,
Okay.
sure.
And so, I guess, could you explain again, I guess, your understanding through the construction process, when will the planting of the vegetative buffer be done?
Ideally, the planting of the vegetative buffer is done when construction activities that require mechanical processes are completed. In this case, we run a fence just inside of that landscape buffer. We'd ideally like that fence to be installed prior to the installation of the landscape buffer. When in the project timeline that happens, it would basically ideally be once that area, once that section of the project is complete, the fence is established, then the landscape buffer would follow.
And so, I guess, just to be very specific about it, would the vegetation be planted before or after pile driving?
Generally speaking, as a best practice, we would plant the vegetative buffer after, because the finalization of the perimeter fence, generally speaking, is prior to energization and the installation of the modules themselves, not necessarily, again, cases vary, but not necessarily prior to pile driving. We don't, there's equipment that moves around and we don't want to damage our infrastructure as we build it.
And are you the witness that can kind of discuss some of the construction timing, or would that be Mr. Stinson?
I can talk to some of it.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
Okay, so do you know how long you expect construction will take?
We expect it to take less than a year. There is variability, seasonal variability, weather events, staffing. There are some items that make it difficult to project an absolute project termination date, but generally speaking, less than a year
So
from
when you
start to
say
finish.
less than a year, do you mean 6 months, 8 months, 10 months?
For the entire duration of the construction project, our goal would be 8 to 10 months.
Okay. And do you all have a planned start date for that?
I don't have an answer for that question, I'm sorry.
Do you believe anyone would have an answer for that?
I believe
today?
Mr. Simpson
Okay.
probably does, thank you.
And do you have any information about how long you think some of this heavy construction would last?
Heavy construction,
Pile driving is the.
pile
most-
driving in it specifically, My understanding is that that can be completed in less than 40 working days. Probably considerably less than that. That's a conservative estimate. Again, bearing in mind soil conditions, weather conditions, and other variables that may impact the duration.
And, I'm sorry, what type of pile driver, do you know?
The specific equipment, I can't speak to the type of equipment a contractor would provide, but generally speaking, it's what you would picture as in the scale of like a mini excavator.
So the contractor who will be hired to do all of the construction is the one who will pick out the pile driver?
That is correct, yes.
And so would that person be, that will not be an employee of AES Clean Energy? It would
That
just
is
be a
correct.
contractor
I'd like
that's
to
hired out?
refine an answer
Okay.
that Ms. Ray provided.
Okay,
I believe that you asked who the, pardon me if I don't state it correctly, but you asked who the personnel that will be constructing the project will be employed by. And I believe she answered AES. It's actually the contractor, the general contractor that wins the bid to construct the project. They'll be the ones actually employing those staff.
so those would be the people who do the construction, but who employs the people that are responsible for ensuring compliance with all of the requirements from Madison County and any requirements for the siting, from the siting board? That's not the general contractor.
Could you rephrase it? Just, I'm sorry, I want to make
No,
sure I
you're fine.
understood correctly.
So the general contractor is responsible for doing the construction and overseeing the construction employees. But who is responsible for ensuring compliance with any requirements from the Madison County conditional use permit and any conditions that would be imposed by the siting board if a certificate is granted?
I believe that generally the EPC, which would be the company that oversees the construction, is required to comply with those requirements. That said, AES does have internal compliance, risk, and QA/QC staff. The acceptance of the project upon completion is contingent upon that contractor, that EPC, properly executing the project per the terms of our agreement and contract.
Okay. And were you the person that the question about the Brassfield Road and Pine Grove Road intersection was
I was
deferred
the
to?
witness who
Okay.
provided that response,
And
yes.
so could you explain, has any more studies been done or determinations been made about what needs to be done to that intersection for construction traffic?
No additional study has been done since the question was responded to, thank you.
Will one be done, or do you all feel comfortable now that that intersection is sufficient as it is?
No, we believe that additional study will need to be done.
Okay. And you, I think you said this, but I just want to be sure, you do not have an anticipated start date for any of the construction?
We have an anticipated completion date,
Okay,
and we work backward from there to a large extent.
Okay.
And Mr. Stimson, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe our anticipated finalization and completion of the project is the end of 2024.
Am I allowed? No.
so if,
He'll have his chance. If I misspoke, I hope he can clarify.
so the end of construction enters, when it's ready to go, I'm sorry, I'm fumbling, is the end of 2024. So construction would begin, I'm assuming, in the beginning of 2024.
That is what I would expect, yes.
So it's almost midway through 2023. When will these studies be started?
Following the, I'll have to defer to David on this one, thank you.
Okay. And then about Karst, was that also you?
I'll do my best to
Okay.
answer the questions. Yeah.
So it said that in some of the responses to requests for information, that what was done to evaluate karst for this project was just a review of the Kentucky Geological Survey GIS data. Is that the only thing that was done, or was there some engineering work or anything else done? Is that it?
A field site assessment was conducted by our geotechnical specialist. As it pertains to karst specifically, I can't answer, but understanding they have walked the site, and in those site walks, seek to identify potential risks and other geological and geotechnical features that may impact our design. So my presumption is if there's any field evidence of karst, that they would note that at the time and advise us to do further study if they found that information available.
And they did not make
They
any
did not, no.
recommendations? Okay. Some questions about the transmission line. Would that be for you or for Mr. Stinson?
I can give it a try.
Okay. So it was stated in the application and then some responses that the transmission line is all going to be contained on one piece of property. And that property will be, I wasn't clear, is that property owned by Pine Grove Solar or leased by Pine Grove Solar?
That question I'll defer to Mr.
Okay.
Stimson, thank you.
But it is all on one piece of property?
As I understand, yes.
Okay. Is the LG&E KU switchyard that's to be built also on that same piece of property?
I don't know that information, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll save those then. I think anything else I have is probably for Mr. Stinson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. O'Connor. Not to beat the karst topic to death, but I did want to go back and clarify something. You kind of touched on it with Ms. Temple's question just now, but in the developer's response to the first set of questions that they got from siting board, y'all indicated that there wasn't any karst features on the project boundary, which also obviously includes sinkholes, which is a karst feature in and of itself. But in Tetra Tech's report that they submitted as attachment C in the impact studies, there were 7 sinkholes indicated on a map within that report. That obviously is contradicting information and just needs some clarification on that. That was obviously done through a field survey that they did themselves, which you indicated had been done. I'm really not clear whether there's sinkholes there or not at this point.
I apologize, Mr. Lyons. I'd be happy to take a closer look at it.
I would refer you to the Tetra Tech report and the map that's included in that report.
Excuse me, Mr. Gardner, I'm going to need a little help locating that.
Mr. Lyons, could you give us a site for that report?
Yes, it's the Tetra Tech memo, date December the 20th, 2021. It was submitted as a case filing actually December 21st, 2022 is in the commission record. Attachment C, impact studies.
May I approach them?
You may.
I'm finding it. Yeah, I believe it's here. Sinkhole locations.
Yes.
I would need to see an overlay on the plan.
And the map is part of the figures.
Mr. Lyons, I'm looking at the figure now, thank you.
Okay, got you.
I do look at a lot of these projects. I'm sorry. My recollection was that we had not had any on this parcel, but it appears that I was incorrect. Thank you for bringing that up. Are there any questions you have specifically to management and mitigation of construction practices in regard to karst formations?
I think we probably just need a little bit better clarification. You kind of addressed it in your response to the data response on 1.6 in the first data set. You say you'll maintain, if you do find something, all activity within a 50-foot radius void will immediately stop and construction equipment will be prohibited. I guess a better question is, though, what kind of buffer would you maintain from karst features if they do exist?
If they do exist, generally we follow the recommendations of our geotechnical consultant. I'd have to look through the report and what the specific recommendations were in this study. There are some best practices, but generally we rely on those specialists to define what that buffer is. So what that is, I'd have to read the report, understand it better, and recite that for you, sir.
I don't know that there was anything in the particular, if you're referring to the Tetra Tech study here, I don't know that there was any recommendation on karst features necessarily, since that was more of a biological assessment report. I guess that brings the question, have you all actually done a karst study, or was it just some type of desktop survey that you did with the Kentucky Geological Survey GIS data portal?
I'll have to defer this question to Mr. Stimson as far as which studies were done and when.
Okay. We quite often do get formal individual karst studies.
Yes, and I'm aware that we do them. I'll be frank, I'm doing my best to answer the questions you're asking, and I very much want to. My focus for this project were the traffic concerns specifically, and some construction-related questions. AES does employ geotechnical subject matter experts. We have two of them in-house. They're not here. We didn't anticipate this line of questioning. I apologize.
Okay, well, I think through the questioning, though, in answering, we have established that there is some discrepancy
Understood,
in
thank
the
you.
data we do have, so we'll just need to clarify that in some way. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Montgomery?
Good morning. I do not have any questions for this witness, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair?
Questions?
Do you expect concrete foundations for pilings to be used on this project?
We don't anticipate that to be the case. The soil characteristics don't indicate that that's going to be necessary. There may be some discrete cases where subsurface conditions are encountered during the construction process that vary from the generalized understanding of the site. We don't pre-drill every pile to determine the soil characteristics at every location. Geotechnical reporting is more general. So I can't say that it won't happen, but it is not anticipated to happen. But noted, corner posts on our fence and some intermediate posts on our fence lines are set in concrete, so that concrete would be removed.
Those are not placed at depths in excess of 4 feet.
No.
Agree? So what subsurface characteristics do contribute to the need for concrete foundations for for piling?
I honestly can't, I can't envision a scenario where we would require that, to be frank. It is not a best practice. The general guidance would be to increase your pile size as opposed to placing concrete. It would be a very select and odd case where we're setting them in concrete.
Yeah, and so how does the interaction with karst at some depth underneath the subsurface play into the determination of the correct, racking foundations?
Well, to be frank, if a karst cavern was discovered, if a vault or something or other channel was discovered immediately where we intend to drive a pile, we would have to either not drive a pile there or come up with a unique engineering solution to that problem. We can't drive a pile down into an open space.
Have you all used in your experience as AES, used other racking systems as opposed to just the ordinary pilings and rackings on top of them?
Yeah, there are a number of
Ground-mounted or screwed racking systems?
screws, grade beams, other things are used at times, yes, if the soil conditions and site conditions require that.
If you all plan on getting this done, I heard sometime in 2024, when will you all actually do the on-site geotechnical analysis?
I believe that on-site geotechnical analysis that's used to generate the design criteria for piles has been completed. It's specific to karst. I'm not aware that has or hasn't been done yet.
Who would know?
I would believe Mr. Simpson has that information.
Earlier, do you remember staff asking you about the timing of the planting of vegetation buffers? And can you remind me, when is the timing that you all would ordinarily, the question was, do you all anticipate, paraphrasing here, but would you all anticipate having the vegetative buffers planted prior to pile driving? I think your response was no. Do you remember that?
That is correct.
When would you all, why not?
Why not? The longevity and success of the plantings is the primary concern. We'd like to plant them, have those plants thrive, and to have those and have that planting be successful. Placing it's potential that if we're planting early in the construction phase, that those are temporary, and we don't want to have to rip them up and try again.
Yeah, but I guess I don't understand what's temporary about it.
It's difficult to warranty the plant material if you have heavy construction happening in close proximity to them.
So your answer to staff council alluded to fencing. What does that have to do with the planting of the vegetative buffer?
Because the vegetative buffer is planted right along a fence line. The means and methods for construction of a fence requires accessing that fence from both sides, and there would be potential for equipment and staff to be standing in the midst of these plantings prior to their successful rooting and establishment.
You plant the vegetative buffer outside or inside of the
Outside
fence?
of the fence.
And what's the requirement as to how close the fencing is to the vegetative buffer?
I mean, ultimately, I believe we space it a couple feet. It's not significant.
Okay. And just to be clear, the timing of the fencing, at least for your all's position, is related to the NESC requirements. Is that right?
We comply with the requirements, but the timing is more directly related to the construction in the area. The NESC, which I am not an expert on, I'm familiar with the clause in particular, requires that fencing be provided prior to energization of the system.
Well, that was what your response to staff council indicated, is that
Yes.
the timing of the buffer would not occur until after, your expectation was until after the energization of the facility would occur.
Until after the establishment of the fence.
So you expect that it would operate for a number of years before the buffer actually becomes effective?
No, not at all, sir.
Okay, well, so the request in this case is that you all plant a vegetative buffer that grows to 6 feet within 4 years. Is that your understanding?
That sounds correct, yes.
Okay, so if it's not yet 6 feet.
Oh, I
in the
see what
first
you're
4
saying.
years, it will be and you're not putting the fence up until about the time you decide to flip the switch. It will be operating for a number of years without the entire buffer. Would you agree?
Yes, if the buffer's, planned best efficacy is at a certain point in the life cycle of the plants, yes, that won't occur. That point won't occur until some
How long
point
are you-
in the future.
How long are your plants warranted?
I can't answer that question, I'm sorry. I can't speak to we have an expected life cycle of our projects, and our expected life cycle for all of the equipment materials provided matches. So we would anticipate that the species are successful for the duration of the project.
Well, so
I'm
I've got to ask about that because I don't know that necessarily makes sense. I mean, our day job is regulating utilities, right?
Understood.
And when you build a power plant, you expect the power plant to last 60 years. You don't expect every single component to last 60 years. The anticipation is through ordinary replacement of projects, the entire asset will last 60
No,
years.
we anticipate O&M because not nothing's perfect.
A
but-
panel is going to fail.
Sure.
A tree is going to die.
Sure.
Do you all specifically expect to just say, well, if panel fails, we won't fix it, or we'll change
No, not at
the
all.
daisy chain, or if a plant dies, what's the anticipated plan that those be replaced
Well-
if it's prior to the end of the 35-year period?
Right, we would replace plants as needed. We hope and expect that the plants will survive through the duration, but in the case that they don't, if the visual screen that we've attempted to achieve is no longer satisfactory, we'd have to replace plants. But we expect that the plants survive for the duration.
Yeah, so how does that work if you've got a planned life cycle? Do you know if this project has a PPA or not?
I'm
I can ask Mr. Simpson, that's okay.
I would appreciate
But let's say that, industry, I've never seen let me ask this, have you ever seen a 35-year-old solar facility?
I have not, sir.
What's the oldest solar facility that you're aware of? that you've
I
done?
couldn't begin to put a timeline on that. I've seen a lot of them, and I don't know how old they all are.
Yeah. So assuming this thing can last 35 years.
Yep.
Have you been aware generally that most PPAs are signed between 15 and 25 years?
No, I'm not aware of that.
You have no idea how long the ordinary PPA is in the power industry?
I'm not. It's not my area of
Okay.
expertise.
So let's just say, for argument's sake, the ordinary PPA lasts 20 years, or even 25 years.
Okay.
You all think the project's gonna last 35. How does that last 10 or 15 years work from the answer you were given earlier about the replacement and the condition of the facility? So, this is a great example. You expect the facility to last 35 years. 31 years into it, you start having a section of, let's say, 12 feet, right? Maybe 3 pine trees, whatever, conifer, whatever you all are using to do the buffer. 3 trees just die inexplicably. We know that you all expect those trees to get to 6 feet within 4 years. That's the same type of trees. That's what your all's recommendation is that the siting board adopt. Would you all replace those, given that the facility is only expected to last 4 more years?
I'm not that well versed in the O&M practices for a project like this, to be honest with you.
Do you know who is?
I'd have to defer that to Mr. Simpson and hope he knows that answer. That's not one I'm good with. I'm sorry.
And just a final question, follow up on Deputy Secretary Lyons' line of questions. Who is the person responsible at at AES Clean Energy to determine whether there are karst issues and how to respond to those karst issues?
Our project development team and our geotechnical subject matter expert. A specific name?
Is there anybody at this hearing that we can ask questions of this?
I
this
don't,
issue?
no, I don't think so, no, sir.
Okay. Have you watched any of these hearings in the past, by any chance?
I have not,
Or
sir.
reviewed any of the cases? Is this your first case that you've ever
Before
done?
the Kentucky Sighting Board, yes, sir.
Okay. You've not reviewed any of the other projects that AES may have become responsible for in other places of the state?
I have not, sir. I've been in the employ of AES for 8 months.
Okay.
I'm a land development engineer, civil specialty, and I've been in the business for 25 years. As it pertains to construction means and methods, generalized, I am an expert in my field, but my experience with solar development is somewhat new.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Ms. Bryce, do you have any redirect?
Nothing further for this witness.
Thank you, you may step down.
Thank you.
Do you have to call your next witness?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Pine Grove Solar would call Chris Hulick.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury? All right, please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
My name is Christopher Hulick. My address is 6175 Willow Lane in Farmington, New York.
Ms. Bryce?
Mr. Hulick, by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Tetra Tech,
And what is your title?
acoustical scientist.
And can you tell the siting board what your involvement is in this project?
Yes, I helped prepare the acoustical analysis report.
Okay, and so did you prepared a report submitted along with the application for this project?
Yes,
And do you adopt that application today as your work?
yes.
That's nothing further.
Counsel?
Were you responsible for the response to the DDC report regarding the sound mitigation measures they recommended?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So what recommendation did you specifically make on noise mitigation in this case?
I believe we recommended some best practices such as limiting construction hours, and ensuring that the equipment is well maintained and using muffler systems, locating equipment as far away as possible from noise sensitive areas, and utilizing a noise complaint hotline to address any individual complaints.
I don't have any other questions for you, thank you.
Deputy Secretary Lyons?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Mr. Montgomery?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair? I don't have any either. Thank you very much. You may step down.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bryce, would you have to call another witness before we take a break?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Pine Grove Solar would call Dr. Paul Coombs.
It's good to catch yourself, Ms. Bryce.
I don't want to understate
amount of-
anyone's credentials.
Yeah, that's smart too, but you don't want to offend anybody. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do, sir.
All right, please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
Paul Coombs, 3604 Trail Ridge Road, Louisville, Kentucky, 40241.
Ms. Price?
Dr. Coombs, by whom are you employed?
I'm self-employed. I'm a emeritus professor of economics at University of Louisville, and I'm just doing consulting since then.
Can you tell the siting board what your involvement has been with this project?
So I prepared an economic impact statement and a fiscal statement for this project, looking at the jobs, estimated the spinoff activity, and estimated the the tax flows from the development and submitted a 6 or 8 page report.
And did you also sponsor request to information in this case?
Yes, I didn't quite understand you.
Did you sponsor requests for information in this case?
Yes,
Okay. And do you adopt your reports and those responses today as your testimony?
yes, I do.
I have nothing further for this witness.
Counsel?
Staff does not have any questions.
Mr. Deputy Secretary Lyons?
No questions for me.
Mr.
Thank you.
Montgomery?
Just a few, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Dr. Coombs. So in looking, let me start here. Did you have any involvement in providing economic impact data for the public hearing meeting that was on August 18th of 2022?
For the hearing in Madison County?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, yes. I had provided the impact report by then and testified briefly over there at the public hearing in Richmond.
Okay, and I guess the reason I ask is I look at the numbers from the report there and with your report as well, and while the numbers are slightly different, there is maybe less of an impact in your report, but nonetheless, that report was done later, so I assume that that once you ran the full report, that was published in your report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. And are you aware if there is a IRB or pilot agreement entered into at this time?
I'm not sure how that played out.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas, any questions for Dr. Coombs?
No question, Mr. Chairman.
Question? Commissioner?
I do not.
So I have a couple to follow up on Mr. Montgomery. At the very similar question, because the numbers were very similar between the August presentation and the October report that you filed here, and I wanted to know how things, the timing of things, but you worked with the applicant ahead of their August presentation. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay. So do you have a copy of your report with you?
I have the one from October. I don't have the prior one with me, but I do have I think this is the last draft I did was in October.
That's perfect. So the question I had, well, a couple of questions. So on page 3, I think it's on page 3, excuse me. Page 4, you discuss wage and salaries at 8.6 million. And on page 1, you have an $11 million amount. Is that merely the distinction between wages and salaries and other benefits?
No, the 8.6 would be the direct payroll plus compensation, fringe benefits. The 11-something includes the spinoff impacts of construction. So that's the multiplier effect. So
Okay.
on the first page, what you're referring to in the second paragraph, new payroll of 11.6 million, that's the total impact estimated based upon the direct construction payroll plus a modest multiplier effect.
Okay. And so I have an appreciation for how you determined the spinoff. I think you did a good job of explaining the spinoff on page 4. The direct effect is or the direct wages and salaries is what I'm less clear of, because at one point on page from 3 to 4, right above the table, you start a sentence that I read as saying that you got the 8.6 provided to you as an input from the company, from however many people they expect to hire and at what rate they intend to hire to create a total amount for the direct. Is that accurate?
That's close. Actually, I estimated the employment using this California Berkeley study that I've used in others of these studies, It's based upon megawatt hours.
Okay.
And it's a fairly comprehensive study over a half dozen major solar projects with a lot of good accounting data. And so they have actual employment as a ratio to megawatt hours. And I use that to predict the 120 direct construction jobs. The company provided me an estimate of wages per job. So I take the 120 direct jobs that I estimated from the Berkeley study and multiplied it times the average pay that the company predicted.
Okay, so the company projected the schedule of labor costs for construction in terms of on a per employee basis, and then you multiplied it by the study you cited in footnote 1 on page 3.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the additional is, so the 8.6 is wages and salaries, and then it goes on to say that the additional fringe benefits are 3.4 million. It was the 3.4 provided by the applicant?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, and I guess what I'm trying to understand is the 8.6, do the wages and salaries of the direct jobs, is that used as a input for the determination of spin-off benefits?
Yes.
Is the fringe benefits amount used as an input for the spin-off wage and
I think in this case, I just used the wages and salaries for the spinoff prediction.
Okay, and then, so just so I'm clear, the next sentence after what we were talking about a second ago, so it'd be the first full sentence on page 4. You note that these projections suggest that average annual pay will be $71,700 for construction jobs. That's the amount that the applicant gave you initially. Is that right? Because you said earlier they gave you the I guess what I'm trying to make sure of is they gave you one input, you got another input from here, multiplied the two to get the total, and you really just are dividing by the Berkeley amount to get back to the 71,700. Is that right?
You're asking a great question, and I just don't have the raw stuff in front of me to
Okay.
answer the question fully. I see what you're getting at about the difference between whether I'm including the fringes
Yeah.
or not, and I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
I should have spelled it out more clearly in that paragraph.
Yeah, and I guess, really my question surrounds veracity is probably the wrong term to use, but the weight in which should be provided to the amount provided to you as an input from the applicant as to what the appropriate salaries and wages are, because I guess this is it would be a bit self-serving for an applicant, right, that has to acknowledge or tell us what the economic impact is, to overstate what the economic impact is. But, I mean, I'm not calling into question the Berkeley calculation. I'm just making sure that I understand where the other half of the equation came from, and you're saying it was just provided to you by the applicant.
Actually, I don't think anyone really knows because they use a general contractor to hire the
Yep.
people. So everything here is an estimate. It might make you comfortable to know that I've done probably a dozen of these, and usually I use my own estimate of the construction pay. And if you see the table below in that same page where I look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data by occupation, I usually estimate it to be around $50,000 per job, wages and salaries, which I think is very reasonable. If you take $50,000 per job times 120 jobs, I think you're going to get 60,000. Well, yeah, you're going to get 50,000 per job times 120 jobs is, what is that, 6 million, something like that?
Yeah.
So it's in the ballpark, and I don't think anybody knows until after the fact, what the construction payroll was. and there's no requirement that the construction company even report it.
Yeah.
So we're all dealing here with estimates.
Well, and that was gonna be my last question, is there going to ever be a feedback through either use of models or whatever it may be for this determination? Is it ever gonna, you've done this in at least 5 to 10 projects, you've been the expert, right? None of these have been built yet, and we've received more than 30 applications or notices of applications at this point. It's yet to be seen whether any of them are gonna be built yet. One in which was supposed to break ground already, I found out the other day, has been suspended for some apparent reason. So at some point, these folks will be hired to construct these. Hopefully, if the data gets back to BLS, it's appropriately characterized and it's put in the right bucket. Is there an opportunity for that to ever feed back in and then, educate us on what the actual wages ended up being?
That's a great point, and I'll be working on that for the next case. Okay. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics will never disclose the payroll or the jobs for any particular
Right.
business establishment. So it's not going to be in published data,
Yeah.
the actual amount of construction payroll for a particular project. We would almost have to get it from a general contractor that managed the whole thing, and that would require their cooperation. But I think it's a great point, and I would love to know too, so.
Is there a chance that we ever get BLS data that's specific to the industry, specific to the type of generation on at least even a statewide or region-wide basis?
For a construction project, yes. For a solar construction project, I'm not sure that they're going to go that finely
Yep.
and break it out by type of construction project.
Okay.
So we do have average pay in construction, for about the county level, state level. We
Right.
have it by occupation. The question is the mixture of occupations that get used. How many people are engineers and general managers versus people that just install fences or do landscaping? That mixture determines the average, right? And we don't have the details at this point, but I hear your question. It's a great one, and I will dig into it.
Yeah, I always want as good of evidence as we can to make the determination. I think in most of these orders, we've said, the evidence is not necessarily entirely clear, but taken in totality, directionally, it shows that there's a positive economic impact. It would be best over time if we're gonna have all these things get built, that we actually get something out of it on the other side in terms of employment. You had a question, Vice Chair?
Just along that line, and not particularly associated with this application necessarily. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
How would you envision that we could get more accurate information in order for you to do the job that you're hired to do, for us to do the job that we're supposed to do with these 30 applications, and to know that the data is specific to Kentucky or as close as we can get to Kentucky wages and actual benefits so that we don't mislead people about these sites? How might we follow up to get some more specifics?
So if I understand your question, a lot of what I consider is Kentucky-specific, Madison County-specific information.
Okay.
So if you'll look at that table I've got on that same page we were just discussing, those are Kentucky-specific wages by very detailed occupations. So that's localized. The models that I'm using, in this case for Madison County, are custom to Madison County. So it's called M-Plan, which is the most widely used impact modeling system out there. And I purchased data for all 120 counties and the state total. And that allows me to build a model specific to Madison County that shows how much each of 500 industries purchase from all other potential 500 industries. And so that's the basis for the multiplier effects or the spinoff impacts, which are quite modest, actually. It's not like a manufacturing plant, for example, that may have a job multiplier of 3, 4, or 5. Almost all of the projects I've looked at so far have job multipliers in the range of 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, because the the supplies to a solar project are not made in Kentucky generally. Hardly any of them are. They're imported from other places. So you don't have a lot of inter-industry linkages to cause a big spinoff impact. Madison County is fairly developed economically, so you do have some good retail and service support there. So you do have some of that sort of spinoff from household income from the new wages and salaries. But in some of the other projects I look at, there's very little retail in those counties. And so that makes the spinoff impact or the multipliers quite small. So my point is, every one of these is based on a very region-specific replication of the local economy to predict how much can be supplied locally versus has to be imported. So it's not just a national cookie cutter thing we're using here.
But so the other part of my question, though, is in response to what the chairman is seeking, and knowing what these things actually will supply in terms of jobs and benefit to the economy, recognizing your expertise, do you have a suggestion for how we might measure that or where we might get the data?
Or whose arm we can twist to start collecting the data?
I'll think about it and get in touch with you. It's a great question, and I'd like to know too. So, and you're specifically interested in the, not so much the spinoff, but the direct construction, jobs, and payroll, correct? That's the main question.
Well, it's been on.
Yeah, so my understanding from previous conversations and previous testimony you've given is that the spinoff should show up fairly well in the M-plan through
Yes.
an iterative process. It's
Yes.
the direct that we have, I guess, that I personally have less confidence in the ability to get the feedback and it be taken into account. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the M-plan should pick up that's why it's giving a 1.2, 1.3 multiplier, not a 5 times like a factory would, is because it over time takes data from other places that are similar and actually shows what the local economic impact is by virtue of these jobs or these projects coming in. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
You said it well, and it's a very reliable, consistent model. It's obviously a modeled number, but I'm comfortable with that. Maybe one way to get at this is some of the solar developers actually do manage the construction themselves, and they would have, I've had a couple now that have actually had some information that they shared with me about the sort of programming of workers by occupation and their pay, as opposed to we're going to hire a contractor and they're going to spend $80 million or $100 million and we don't know what's in that box. So I think we've actually already been before you with one of those, but the data was proprietary to me that they shared with me. I used it to come up with my estimate of direct payroll. So I'm not sure how we make that public, but there is some information out there by companies that do manage the construction themselves.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, is it okay if I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, Mr. Coombs won't mind. Dr. Coombs, excuse me. Go ahead, Mr. Montgomery.
Dr. Coombs, just one quick follow-up on some of your testimony. We've had consultants come testify before us in the past that have said through M-Plan that the county level data is unavailable, and even at the regional level it is unavailable. If I'm hearing you right, it is available, it's just available for purchase. Is that correct?
So there's two pieces to the puzzle. There's the construction piece, and then there's the operations piece. And those are different sectors in the M-Plan model. The construction piece is fleshed out. In every county I've looked at, the model is populated for that sector and predicts the linkages to other sectors. It's the operations phase that is not populated. There's no history of operations in the historical data that we build the M-Plan models with. It's not that material because there's usually only 2 to 3 operations jobs that the company predicts. And so I've never treated it as a very serious issue. And also the Berkeley model does also predict the operations job. That's how I get the 2 or 3. It's based on the megawatt hours again of what it would take to maintain that over 35 years. So, yeah, you're right. We can't use the implant model to predict the spin-off activity from the operations phase, but it's so small, I don't think it's that relevant for you all to worry about.
Sure, I guess my question though is around, even, let's just use construction. If you use the in-plan model, the data is available at the county level, especially for construction, correct? Is that correct?
It is available. The models are populated for that sector in every county I've looked at, including counties that only have a population of 8 or 10,000.
Perfect. Well, that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Price, any questions from Dr.
Nothing
Coombs?
further for this
All right,
one.
thank you, Dr. Coombs. We'll take a short recess and come back at 11 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I ask that Dr. Coombs and Mr. Hulick be excused as we have no intention of recalling them?
That'll be fine. They can be excused. All right, we will come back in 15 minutes. can I get somebody in the background to confirm, or John or Sydney, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Great, okay. We're back on the record in case number 2022-00262. Ms. Price, would you like to call another witness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Pine Grove Solar calls Richard Kirkland.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
Richard Kirkland, 9408 Northfield Court, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Counsel?
Mr. Kirkland, by whom are you employed?
Kirkland Appraisals,
And what's your title?
I'm head appraiser.
Can you tell the siting board what your involvement is with this project?
I was asked to complete property impact value impact analysis on properties around the proposed solar project.
And was that report you generated filed in this case?
I believe so.
And do you adopt your findings in that report today as your testimony?
I do.
I have nothing further for this witness.
Counsel?
No questions, thank you.
Deputy Secretary Lyons?
No questions for me, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Montgomery?
No questions for me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair? Commissioner? So, do you have a copy of your report with you?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, do you mind to go to the Kentucky specific section of it? I think it's on page 30.
Okay.
So, the first item here is a match pair analysis with Crittenden Solar in Crittenden, Kentucky. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what is the size of that facility?
That is 2.7 megawatts.
Okay. And then the following match pair analyses are for facilities not located in Kentucky. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So do you mind to take a look at, we'll just look at the visuals. The plat, or the map with the plats and the homes there with Crittenden.
Okay.
All right. So do you know how many of those, how do I say this directly? Have you ever been to Northern Kentucky?
Pardon?
Have you ever been to Northern Kentucky where this facility is located?
Yes, I've visited this site.
Okay, so would you agree that it's not quite mountainous, but that Northern Kentucky, this site is fairly hilly?
It is very hilly.
Okay, and then have you been to the site in which this facility is proposed to be located?
I have.
Would you say that it is hilly or it's more flat?
I don't recall specifically, but I would say it was a little hilly.
Okay. And then the facility in the next match pair analysis, I think it's in Tennessee.
It is.
Okay. Have you been to that facility?
I have not visited that
Okay.
site.
Do you know generally what the
It's got some significant topography on it, yes.
significant what?
Topography?
Okay. As does basically all of Tennessee except for the western portion. And then Illinois. I can't see the topography from the overhead, but I've been to Illinois. I don't know, I'm gonna guess like the highest point in Illinois may be 100 feet. But
It's
this-
generally flat, yes.
this match pair analysis is a fairly flat location, right?
It is.
Okay, so just looking at these three, and I think even the next one is in Indiana, and I think it's fairly flat as well, but it's a very small facility, the fourth match analysis,
Yes.
or the fourth, okay. What role does topography play in terms of the distinction site to site with match pair analysis?
Well, again, it's one of the factors we're looking at, and I would actually direct you to page 53. It's got a summary of the sites you were just talking about as well as the rest.
Okay.
And you can see we've addressed the amount of topography that goes across the project themselves. So it's not specific to the adjoining parcels or how high, much hills are around it. It was hard to measure topography and compare apples to apples through these. But what we did measure was across a specific project, the highs and the lows, to find out how much of a topography, how much shift there was. So actually, some of the most significant topography we've looked at is actually in Virginia. But that is also a function of the size of that project. When you have a greater series, much more acreage, there's a lot more room for the topography. It's not shown in this chart, but we've also done some analysis where we looked at topography relative to the size and those natures. So again, they do seem to blend out well.
Okay, and then, you know, the analyses, I'm looking at some of these different projects, right? The Virginia, I'm going from the bottom, right? But Project 7, Project 6, Project 8, they all have a varying, they vary in the way that they interact with the surrounding homes. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, they all have a certain variation, but what exactly was?
Well, so some of them have no homes directly adjoining it, and then some of them, like the facility in Crittenden, it completely surrounds effectively a single road that's 2/3 developed with homes.
Well, I would say all of them have residential homes adjoining them, but yeah, some, they have varying amounts.
And some are across the street, right? I mean, that's a distinction. I guess what I'm trying to ask in relation to this proposed facility, what is your screen to determine similarity for those facilities not located in Kentucky? Right, because two places in Kentucky can be diametrically different. You can go to, you know, rural western Kentucky where there's not much change in topography and not a lot of trees, and you can see for a long period, long way, and there's not much population. Or you can go to Lexington and Louisville or Northern Kentucky where there's a very dense population but different, topographical features. What's the screen when you're doing these match pair analyses to determine what the appropriate comparisons are to the selected facility?
Well, within the paired sales themselves, we're trying to look at home sales that are nearby, so they would be in that same general area, just not adjoining the solar farm. So when you're looking at the property that's next to a solar farm, you're comparing it to similar homes nearby, but so in the same market, but not next to the solar farm. Now, if the question is really how do I compare that solar farm and the data I pull from that solar farm to this location, I would again point to page 53, this chart. We are looking at both, on the left-hand side, you can see the sort of the physical characteristics where we talk about size, acreage involved, distance to adjoining homes, and the mix of adjoining uses. And then on the right side, you can see we looked at really demographics. We're looking at how much population is within a 1 mile radius, what the median income is, and average home price, to try to make sure that we are looking at similar economic areas, and make sure that we've got everything bracketed. Ideally, everything is always bracketed.
Okay, so, but what are you looking at specific to those comparisons? So let's ask, just choose a specific data point. The proposed facility at 1 mile radius has 260 people with an average income of $58,563 and an average home price of should be 190. $190,541. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. So the average or the median, the average of these match pair analyses, the match pair summaries, is 1,481 people per 1 mile of population. The median is 467.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the, I don't want to state the obvious here, but like, that's not necessarily comparable to 226.
Right.
Like, do you say one standard deviation away, double, triple? How are you comparing the similarity between the current facility and the other? You're just comparing it. You're not saying, what data are you using here to say that it's representative of the information you would use to determine the impact of the current facility?
Right. Well, again, this when I'm talking about bracketing, I'm talking about when you look. Again, that's back to looking at the distance from home to panel. Again, a lot of the projects where we're looking at, clearly Crittenden's got smaller lots compared to where we're at now.
Yeah.
But we've got other examples that show that. And we're really looking at those distances from the homes to talk about the setback from panel to home. And that really addresses the view shed issue with that question. As far as larger parcels go, we have plenty of examples of larger home, larger tracts, a home on 5 or 10 or so acres. It gets to be complicated from a paired sales analysis when you start getting on like a home on 100 acres, because it's very hard, even from just a straight up appraisal. When you go to appraise a farm, we do that regularly, and you almost have to break it into pieces, because finding a similar identical home on a similar size tract in that same market is going to be problematic, because you're going to have differences in age. You're going to have significant differences between those homes, whether it's the age, the size, the quality, or the acreage. Maybe you can find the right house, but this one's on 5 and this one's on 50 acres. You wind up having significant issues, and paired sales analysis really wants you to isolate one issue that you're really testing for, which in this case is the presence of a solar farm.
Right, but doesn't it necessarily affect the home price in that particular area? I mean, if every home is on 17 or 20 acres as opposed to every home is on a half an acre, that's going to affect your matched analysis, that your comparison of home price to home price between your other, well, so here's a great example. If you're still on 53, the facility in Spotsylvania, Virginia, you see that?
Yes.
Or the facility is called Spotsylvania. That there are only 74 individuals within 1 mile.
That's what that shows. The problem with that analysis, that 1 mile radius on that one, and when I've got it on my larger list, I spread it out to 3 miles, is because that project is of such a size. 1 mile radius is, a lot of that mile is actually inside the solar farm itself.
So it's not a mile radius.
It's a mile radius.
It's a mile radius from the center of the project.
It is, yes.
So project shape can also skew that 1 mile radius.
Yeah, so with the larger project, the 3 mile radius is a bit more informative, and I have that data, it's just not pulled to this chart.
Do you have that data here for that project?
I don't, but I can refer you back over to the actual write-up on Spotsylvania, and you can see there is a large number of homes. There's a subdivision right next to it. It's actually a golf community. So I guess that's on page 50. And we have expanded data on this since I've done this report. We've got a lot of additional sales. There are new home construction going on actively adjoining the solar farm. So there's a whole new phase being developed right next to this right now.
Well, the reason I ask about this is because, that project information on 53 would indicate a small number of population, but a significant average housing unit cost, which would indicate to me larger lots.
There are some large lots you can see on page 51 where we're looking at some adjoining 5 and 11 acre lots.
Yeah.
But most of those home values are actually in that Fern Valley subdivision, where they're selling homes in the $700,000 range in that subdivision.
And then finally, what's been your experience with the use of the location of, so one of the things that we have seen, I think, increasingly in front of the siting boards or even on the utility side is an interest by certain utilities, certain developers, and frankly, certain industrial customers to locate facilities closer to the industrial facilities themselves, right? Whether it's use of land that has previously been marketed for economic development purposes and a project hasn't come, and so they now want to use it for large solar projects. We've seen this in Henderson, Webster County area in western Kentucky. It's being discussed in other places. And we have the largest demand of renewables in Kentucky is coming from multinational or large corporations that have manufacturing facilities or large footprints here. What is your experience with these types of facilities in close location to industrial or manufacturing, large commercial or industrial facilities? Because from the data, it doesn't seem like there was much analysis from that. And I didn't know if that was because you were looking at I don't know why you don't have much data on that front. And I'm just curious if it's project specific or there just isn't much data as to the location of solar facilities close to industrial or commercial facilities.
Well, there is data on that, but it is a smaller subset of the data that comes out. Most of the projects that we've looked at are in more rural areas, and the most common adjoining use is going to be residential or agriculture, depending on whether I look at it based on the number of adjoining parcels or based on the average acreage around it. If I look at acreage, it's always agriculture. If I look at parcels, it's always residential. There are, I say always, I should say most of the time. There are plenty of examples that I've looked at where they are in more industrial areas and that there are adjoining industrial uses. Frequently, when the solar goes in next to industrial uses, they wind up being in that sort of buffer land between the industrial uses and nearby agricultural and residential areas. So they do tend to serve as a buffer and then put in landscaping between those. And depends on whether, in some instances, they're going on land that's zoned industrial. In most cases, they're going on land that's not zoned industrial, but just happens to be next to land zoned industrial. So there are a lot of examples of that. The reason that my data probably doesn't show that is because since I'm testing for impacts on property values, I'm looking specifically in residential areas, and I'm also specifically not looking in areas where there's already something that could be causing negative impacts to that area. If you have, for example, one of the sites in Kentucky where I don't pull data from is next to the plant over there off the lake. I wouldn't be able to use that data because there's already an impact from the existing fossil fuel power plant.
You're effectively saying you're already controlling.
Yeah, I'm trying to find sites that don't have something else that could be causing a negative impact. Because if you look at a site next to industrial and there's heavy industrial use in the area, that industrial use is already a factor in there and could be a reason that you're not. It could be influencing the data. So I'm trying to avoid that just to be able to answer the question I'm being asked.
So the last set of questions I have is about impact of property following the use of the facilities. So, everybody keeps talking about, I say everybody, we continue to get a lot of testimony in front of us over the last few years that talk about industry standard for decommissioning and industry standard for decommissioning, and then the question gets asked, how many projects have you decommissioned? The answer is usually 0, right? These are all, I get that Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House for a short period of time, but it's not like we have 500, 1,000 acre solar projects that have come to the end of their life in large places in the U.S. Have you reviewed the change in property valuations following the decommission of facilities, and whether or not the restored land has the same or similar value that other surrounding uses have?
I have not. I don't know of an example of where I would look to do that.
Okay. You haven't been asked to ever review post decommissioning the value of land as compared to surrounding land?
No, I've never been asked to do that.
All right, Ms. Price?
I have nothing further for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Cardinal.
Thank you.
Ms. Price, would you have to call your next witness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And may I also ask that Mr. Kirkland be excused?
You may.
Thank you. Next, we'll call David Stimson.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
My name is David Parker Stimson. I reside at 2600 Monument Avenue, Apartment 1, Richmond, Virginia, 23220.
Ms. Price?
Mr. Stimson, by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by the AES Corporation.
And what's your title?
I am a development manager for solar.
And can you tell the siting board what is your involvement with this project?
I am the lead developer for this project, so I'm a bit of a generalist. I am not the SME in one particular area except for the project itself. So I have all the landowner relationships with the county, and have been working on this project the longest of those who are here today.
And did you sponsor responses to requests for information in this
I sure
case?
did.
And do you adopt those responses today as your testimony?
I do.
I have nothing further for this witness.
Counsel?
Thank you. Mr. Stinson, we had briefly discussed with Ms. Ray kind of some information about the project site. I just want to confirm, so it is a 486 acre total site?
Correct, yeah, the exact acreage is 485.44 acres, and that's according to the county GIS website.
Okay. And then what is the fenced acreage of that?
The total fenced acreage for the project would be about 230.6 acres, and the total project area that contains project components would be about 248 acres. The difference between those two are things like entrances, roads, etc.
And then, do you know at this point about how many panels there will be?
I believe our most recent estimate is about 120,000 panels.
And inverters?
I will have to defer to Colin Chernowitz on that question.
So I just want to talk about this noise issue for a second, the noise. Were you the person who kind of directed the response to the BBC report in regards to the mitigation measure about noise?
That was not my witness, no.
Do you know who did do that?
So that was a combination of Chris Hulick, who did our acoustic analysis, as well as Joshua O'Connor.
Okay, I believe they both indicated that they were not the correct people to discuss this with.
Could you refine the question, please?
Okay. Yes, so the BBC report indicated that one of the mitigation measures they would propose would be some limiting of sound, specifically of the pile drivers, through some other method other than just timing. And the response to that was, that is what AES does in their projects. Timing of pile driving is basically the only noise mitigation measure that AES has used in the past.
Typically, that's correct. Yeah, we work with the county to work on timing restrictions like we have with Madison County. I believe our pile driving restrictions are 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday on this project. Our construction hours are actually expanded from that, so our pile driving is limited even within our construction time frame. And then we also set up a hotline for those who have complaints, including noise complaints. And that hotline will be directed to our either construction or operations team, depending on who is running the project at the time. And they'll be able to address those concerns in real time.
And so, also in the response to the BBC report, you all went over kind of other siting board orders that have been issued and what was recommended by or what was ordered by the siting board in those cases. And so I'm assuming that you all are aware that the siting board does require more noise mitigation, specifically for pile driving, other than just time of day. And so what steps are you all going to take to comply with any other noise mitigation that's required?
We will comply with noise mitigation that is required. Our intention with that response was to give our standard operating procedure. That being said, we are aware through various sources that the siting board does impose noise mitigation measures on other projects. So we are happy to comply with those if the siting board chooses to impose them upon us.
Okay. Sorry. And now for the transmission line issues. So it was stated that that transmission line is going to be on one piece of property. And what is the anticipated length of that?
A couple hundred feet, I think we're anticipating between 200 and 300 feet, and it's all on one property, you're correct.
And is the to-be-built LG&E KU switchyard on that same piece of property?
Yes, ma'am.
And you all are planning to interconnect directly with the switchyard?
Correct, yeah, the switch yard will connect to a transmission line owned by Kentucky Utilities that runs through the project site.
And when do you anticipate construction will start on that portion?
So we originally quoted the siting board construction on the entire project beginning in December of 2024 and wrapping up in, it looks like, July of 2026. While that is what we submitted, it is in our commercial interest as a company to get these projects done as quickly as possible. Our goal commercial operation date would be the end of 2025, which would put our goal construction start date at the end of 2024. So I did want to correct a few statements that were made previously about that timeline. So we do have quite a bit more time than was previously stated to do studies, et cetera.
So that, when it was stated that end of 2024, you're changing?
I am
Okay.
amending that, correct.
And so construction would kind of begin at the beginning of 2025?
Correct, or the end of 2024.
Okay.
Late 2024, early 2025. A lot of that just depends on weather sequencing,
Okay.
as you can imagine.
And so I appreciate that, but my question was actually, and I'm sorry if it was not clear, is about the LG&E KU switchyard. So that has not started construction either. Is that anticipated to be done? I'm assuming that's going to be built by a different general contractor because LG&E and KU are doing that. So is that going to be done in the same timeline or before or?
Yeah, that'll be done in the same timeline. I can't give you a specific month, but typically our substation and the switchyard are constructed towards the end of the construction period.
Okay. So in the conditional use permit, it listed specific setbacks, which were 100 feet from the center line of any road to project infrastructure, and then 100 feet from project infrastructure to adjacent non-participating property, and 200 feet from project infrastructure to any adjacent property that contains a residence. And so I just wanted some clarification on what you all are considering project infrastructure to mean for those setbacks. Is that the fence? Is that the panels? Like, what is that specific?
Yeah, so they include that definition. That was something we discussed with the county in that condition. So it includes fencing panels, structures, or other related equipment. In this case, all of our electrical equipment is enclosed in the fence. For the purposes of this, we can consider it the fence.
So the fence is the kind of measuring point for
Correct, to the
those setbacks?
setback.
Okay. And what is the distance, if you know, to the nearest non-participating property?
From the fence,
Yes,
non-participating property,
yes.
so that would be, the closest would be 100 feet, but that would be a non-participating property that did not have a residence on it. If it did have a residence on it, the closest setback would be 200 feet.
And is it the nearest non-participating residence is exactly 200 feet from the fence? Or
Excuse
is
me,
it-
let me amend that. Their
Okay.
property line would be 200 feet from the fence. The actual home itself is about 70 feet from the property line. So closest home to fence would be about 270 feet.
And have you all spoken with, and that's the closest one, I'm assuming, are others about that or further out?
There are others that are about that,
Okay.
yes.
And so have you spoken with any of those that would be the closest?
All
to
of them,
see if
yeah,
they,
every single one of them.
Are they okay with the project? Do they have concerns, specifically with the vegetative screening or anything like that?
Yeah, so view shed has been a concern. Right now, the land is currently used as a cattle operation. It is pretty pastoral, so a lot of people don't want to see their view change. And that's been one of the biggest pain points for the neighbors. I think the vegetative screening will help that a lot. You know, once that's established, you won't be able to see the project and be a quiet, respectful neighbor. We also do have a good neighbor agreement with one of the adjacent landowners, landowning families, I should say. And I can't get into the specifics of what that agreement says, but it is an agreement that involves financial compensation for them being basically okay with the development, construction, and operation of the project. So we do have specific agreements in place with some neighboring landowners.
Does that make them a participating landowner?
I don't believe so, no. In my viewpoint, a participating landowner is a landowner with which we have an option to either lease or purchase their land to be built as part of the solar project. I would consider this person or this family a neighboring landowner.
Okay, so for purposes of your CUP, the anticipation is, your testimony today is that there will not be facilities within 200 feet of the property line of the.
Correct,
So let me
yes,
finish the question.
correct,
Of the family that you're referring to.
correct.
Okay.
And I guess just to clarify just a little bit, so it's 200 feet from the fence. Do you have kind of an estimate of how far away the fence is from some of the project components that are inside?
It's about 20 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, so we usually have a 20-foot, maybe a little bit more, strip between panels and equipment that runs around the entire project between the fence and the actual equipment. And that's usually just for like truck access, human pedestrian access, et cetera.
Let me just ask while you're looking, do you plan on using string inverters here or central inverters?
I'd have to defer to Colin for what's on that.
Okay. Do you know what the distance between the fencing and the nearest inverter is, central inverter?
About 150 feet from
Is
the.
it safe to say that a home would be at least 420 feet? The nearest home would be at least 420 feet from the nearest inverter?
I measured the distance from our nearest inverter to a home today, and it was about 700 feet.
Go ahead, counsel.
Actually, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stinson, if this question needs to be redirected to a previous witness, just let me know. I just now thought of this. Will a phase one environmental assessment be done, or has it been done on the property?
It will be done. We require those, our financiers require those to be 6 months, to be done within 6 months or refreshed within 6 months of financial close. So we do not construct projects without having a phase one that is up to date and complete.
Okay, thanks, great. We'll want to see that, obviously.
Sure.
Can you provide any further clarification on some of the karst questions? Did you want to
I
address
cannot.
that?
I can only say that we'll follow up in writing. We have geotechnical expertise within house, and we can have them review our geotech report and provide written response on the karst questions.
All righty, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Montgomery?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stinson, good morning. Just got a couple questions. Are you aware if there has been an IRB or pilot agreement entered into with the county?
I am aware, and we have not.
Great. And then during the operational phase, we've heard testimony today that there might be between 1 and 2 full-time jobs. Do you have any idea of what the occupation of those jobs would be?
Sure, yeah. It ranges anywhere from solar technician, so that's somebody who would repair and maintain the solar components. As some of the chairmen have stated before, from time to time, the panels will, not function properly or break, small portions of them. So they would be sent out there to do maintenance on those types of things, as well as landscaping, because we will have these vegetative buffers and the required vegetative cover underneath the panels. We will have some people on site to maintain that vegetation as well.
That's all the questions I had, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Just one, on the solar technicians, you said those would be two, are those full-time employees or they're two?
Yes,
part-time?
the 1 to 2 employees are full-time employees and employed fully by AES Corp.
On site?
Yes,
Okay, and you think with the solar construction and then finishing, there's enough work for two full-time?
yes, that's our
Technicians going
estimate.
forward?
Yep.
Okay,
And we do it generally based on project size and our
Okay.
experience in other areas, as well as proximity to other projects. So you can imagine if we had, 2 projects that were right next to each other, you could have 2 workers who are working on 2 separate projects. In this case, we don't have another project right nearby, so that bumps that number up a little bit.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
You stated earlier you're employed by AES Corporation, is that right? Or are you employed by AES Clean Energy?
AES Corp.
AES
Yep.
Corporation?
Corp.
Okay. You're generally aware of the conditional use permit that was approved in this case, or that was approved for this project?
Yes, sir, I have a copy right in front of me.
And the conditional use permit is applicable to Pine Grove Solar LLC and AES Clean Energy, is that right?
That's correct.
Why also AES Clean Energy?
Why also AES Clean Energy? So basically, and there was a question earlier about sustainable property companies too that I wanted to address, but so AES Clean Energy is a wholly owned subsidiary of AES Corp. So is Pine Grove Solar LLC. Why are we employed differently? Is that the question, or?
No, why is AES Clean Energy also a party to or responsible for the requirements or conditions of the conditional use permit?
Because it is a subsidiary of the AES Corp. And Pine Grove Solar is also.
Yeah, so you say also, is Pine Grove Solar a subsidiary of AES Clean Energy?
No.
Or AES Corp?
Corp.
Okay, so do you know who the members of of Pine Grove Solar LLC are?
No, that's the one question I'll have to follow up in writing on.
Okay. So you don't, so what is the relationship, so the relationship between AES Clean Energy and Pine Grove Solar LLC is that they are both subsidiaries of the AES Corporation?
Believe so, yes.
Okay. Is AES Clean Energy a direct subsidiary of the AES
I
Corporation?
believe so, yes.
How about Pine Grove Solar LLC?
I believe so.
So, you believe that Pine Grove Solar LLC's member is the AES Corporation? Or do you think there are business entities in between the two?
Again, I'd have to follow up on that
Okay.
specific.
Whoever Pine Grove Solar's member is today, when you all finance these, do you transfer AES, do you transfer entities like Pine Grove Solar LLC for financing purposes? Like, do you add a new member for tax equity purposes?
Yes, sometimes, yes, on a limited basis we do.
Okay, is that the anticipation for Pine Grove Solar, is that there will be a transfer?
Yeah,
for
we
purposes
don't
of
know at
financing?
this time. There was a question earlier about if we have a customer for this project. We do not yet, so that's a part of that process as well.
Okay, so you're saying like, implicitly your answer is that you all may, well, let me ask this question. Do you all, is the plan to get a certificate here, build, own, and operate Pine Grove Solar, or is that yet to be seen?
Get a certificate in the state of Kentucky?
Yeah, this construction certificate that you're applying for here.
Can you repeat the question? The
Yeah,
question
so
is to get a
is
construction.
your entity to, is your intent to get the certificate, build the facility, and operate the facility, or to do something different?
Correct. It is our intention to get the certificate, build the facility, and operate it ourselves.
Okay. So not necessarily to build and transfer.
Correct, not necessarily. That's a very, very small part of our business model.
So no PPA, right?
Correct, none yet. And we're working on finding offtake right now.
But you have a fairly set number from LG and EKU as to what the interconnection costs are, right?
We have a completely set number. Yeah, we have a large generator interconnection agreement with KU, so that number is set in stone.
So you're beyond the facility study. You
Oh, yeah,
actually
we have
an
a signed, we have a signed LGIA, so we have signed interconnection rights with them.
agreement. I'd like to ask for the LGIA as a post-hearing data request. So that's helpful, because I want to go back to the presentation that was done and Dr. Coombs's October report that he gave back to you all. The anticipation was that the cost of the facility, the capital expense of the facility would be $70 million. That number was most recently used in his October report, but it was also used in the presentation to the Planning Commission in August. I think it's safe to say that pricing of solar facilities has changed over the last 2 years. Is $70 million, given that you now know you've got a signed IA, you know, are through this, you know, for the hard part, you're through this process, and you have an anticipated, you know, in construction date in a year and a half. Is $70 million still the anticipated capital cost of this project, or do you anticipate it being more or less now that things are coming into focus a little more?
I would expect it to be slightly more. I mean, I'm sure you know as well as I do that our industry faces, you know, supply chain issues, costs are going up for signing up EPCs or general contractors, for example. So I would expect that cost to go up slightly, you know, not double, for example, but, you know, something in like the 5 to 10% range.
Okay. And we were asking questions and talking to Dr. Coombs earlier, and he was talking about the spin-off effect of, you know, if a facility purchases something from a local community or even the region or the state, that there's an additional economic impact. Specific to this project, do you know where you'll be getting the, do you know whether or not you'll be getting any of the racking facilities from manufacturers in the state, Commonwealth of Kentucky?
In Kentucky, we don't know yet. We have an estimate of what type of racking and panels we'll be using, but that won't be fleshed out until further down the development pipeline.
Okay, so our ability to take that into account for determining economic impact is, we're not going to have that ability given your all's subsequent determination. Is that accurate?
I mean, it's a good starting point. You know, we won't have the specifics on exactly where our racking panels and manufacturer will be until, like I said, down the pike. But yeah, if for the purposes of this question, we do not have that information at this time.
How about the panels?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. O'Connor has a flight issue and needs to leave. No one has requested that he stay. Could he be excused?
Counsel, do you have any additional follow-up, Mr. O'Connor?
No, sir.
Mr. Montgomery, Deputy Secretary, do you all have follow-up questions for Mr. O'Connor?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas?
No, Mr. Chairman.
That'll be fine.
Thank you, appreciate it. Sorry for the interruption.
So what about the panels? Do you know where those panels will be located, will be purchased from? Do you know whether, and I asked specifically for the purpose of determining whether there's a beneficial economic impact from those purchases. Do you yet have a contract or?
No purchase order or purchase request has been made for racking or panels at this time. That usually happens further down the pike when we're closer to, Madeline referenced the 30% design stage that we're at now. That would be closer to a 60 to 90% design phase. The lead times for those are getting longer and longer, but we are still far enough out on this project that our EPC, our general contractor, is typically in charge of issuing the purchase order and purchase request for those. So once we have them signed up, it'll be their responsibility generally to issue those purchase orders.
Are you generally aware of whether or not Kentucky manufacturers produce the racking facilities?
I am not aware.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The panels, are they coming from China?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We haven't picked panels for this project. All that we have right now are basically voltages for the panels. And those voltages are just in line with what is available on the open market, you know, today, basically. I can say that we have a partnership with a company, we have a partnership with several companies to invest billions of dollars in increasing U.S. Solar manufacturing. I will say it's not where it needs to be today to meet demand, but us and a bunch of 5 or 6 other large developers have committed, I think, close to $10 billion to expanding manufacturing in the U.S. over the next, 5 to 10 years.
So the panels today, there's a lag time,
Correct.
like 3 to 6 months? Have you heard that?
Closer to a year.
Okay, so this project could get delayed a bit based on,
Any project could. I think we're very well positioned to meet that goal, commercial operation that I was telling you about before, get close to it. Like I said, we're hitting all of our milestones right now in our development timeline that would allow us to do that. I can't guarantee it,
okay.
Who is Sustainable Property Holding LLC?
Great question. So, in January of 2021, we went under a rebranding. So I was originally employed by a company called Sustainable Property Company. It was S-Power was the short for it. And AES Corp was one of our parent companies. They essentially bought out our other parent company in January of 2021. This land was signed up in 2020 under our old company name. So Sustainable Property Holdings is our land holdings company for our previous, company name, if you want to call it that. The intention would be to transfer over all of our purchase options over to the Project LLC, Pine Grove Solar LLC.
Has that assignment occurred?
Not yet, no. But we do it on all of our projects. We typically do it definitely before construction, and usually around the time we're starting to do diligence for financing.
Okay. So is there an agreement in place or any agreement in place between Sustainable Property Holding LLC and Pine Grove Solar regarding this land?
Agreement meaning?
Option, agree
Yes,
to agree,
yeah, we have
memorandum?
we have options on all of so we have purchase options on all the properties.
No, Sustainable Property Holding LLC has options on all the property.
Correct.
My question is there an agreement between Pine Grove Solar LLC and Sustainable Property Holding LLC regarding this property?
Not to my knowledge, a written agreement. The options do allow us the right to assign, and since Sustainable Property Holdings is still a subsidiary of AES, then it's all a part of our business.
Well, I get that, but AES is not an applicant in this case. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Who's the applicant in the case?
Pine Grove Solar LLC.
Does Pine Grove Solar LLC have any legal right to the property in which it's proposing to construct this facility?
At the moment, technically, no.
So the acres, you have 230.6 and 248. Is that right? Those are the two.
For the fenced in and the equipment, yeah.
Yeah. So the fenced in at 230.6 and a 50 megawatt project. Is that right?
Yes, AC.
That would be the most condensed project out of the, let's call it 35 that I've seen figures for in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That is less than 1 megawatt per 5 acres, right?
Correct.
And that's just the fenced-in area. And so the facility's actually going to have, you said something like 20 plus feet, 20 or more feet between the edge of panels and the fencing. I guess I don't really know how to ask this question other than, have you ever built a project that is able to fit 1 megawatt on less than 5 acres?
Yes,
We
have several projects that fit 1 megawatt on 4.5 acres, 4.2 acres. The ground coverage ratio for this project is slightly higher than we prefer. It's 48% ground coverage ratio of panels, that is. But we're working within the constraints of the site. We can't expand northward, westward, or eastward or southward. North, south, and for the most part to the east of the project are densely forested areas, and to the west it's a secluded site. I mean, you've seen a map of it. To the west are those neighboring properties that we talked about. So our constraint on getting that 50 megawatt number out of this site is the acreage itself.
Well, yeah, but that's the case though, right? I mean, that's what does it surprise you to find out that we've not had a project that I can think of that's as condensed as this? I mean, this is pretty, you're unaware of a project that's less than 4.1 or 4.2 acres, right? That you were saying those are the most condensed projects that you're aware of, is just over 4 acres per megawatt?
Sure.
Yeah. So how close are you all putting these panels in order to make it less than 5 megawatts per acre, or 5 acres per megawatt?
Like I said, the ground coverage, they're closer than we prefer. The ground coverage ratio is 48%. So if you take the whole buildable area, 48% of that's going to be panels. The specific distances between them, I can't say right now. And it changes too throughout the day as the trackers move the panels east to west.
But at some point, how close the panels are does affect runoff, right?
And it affects production as well.
It does. Are these going to be bifacial or single face?
Bifacial is the plan.
Okay. And so that's the other way that you're going to try to eke out 50 megawatts on 230 acres is to have.
And that helps.
Panels on front and back.
Helps, yeah.
But at no point do you all plan on having ground cover for anything other than vegetation, is that correct?
Except for the roads, correct, which is part of
I'm sorry, ground cover underneath the panels
Sure.
is still going to be vegetation?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
native cover.
You don't plan on doing like white gravel or anything to eke out that additional
No, sir.
megawatts that you all need?
No.
When will the bond go into effect? The decommissioning bond go into effect for this facility?
Just familiarizing myself with the language, 1 second. It doesn't say specifically in the conditional use permit. Bert can correct me if I'm wrong, but this will 100% have to be in place before we go to construction. Part of the decommissioning plan that we'll submit, along with our more advanced design, will kick off the bond amount fact finding. Because we'll have to have, a third party come up with a decommissioning bond amount.
Okay. So do you have line 14 of the CUP?
Yeah, hold up.
decommission?
Yeah, right here.
So the first sentence starts off with, prior to the start of construction, applicant will submit a decommissioning plan to the Madison County Planning and Development Office and make it available to anyone upon request. And then it goes on to say, applicant will commit to the following decommissioning requirements to be performed within 12 months from the date the lease expires or terminates, or proof that the solar facility is no longer producing solar energy. Do you see that?
Yep.
So one of those items is H, upon review of the decommissioning plan, the Planning and Development Director / office shall set an amount to be held in the form of a bond. So one thing I just want to get your perspective and I guess commitment from what your all's position on this is, does the review of the decommissioning plan, occur prior to the start of construction or within 12 months from the date that the solar facility is no longer generating?
We would like to get the decommissioning bond amount and the decommissioning plan submitted, signed, sealed, and delivered before construction.
Okay, so I ask it this way, do you all anticipate providing the decommissioning plan for review and approval prior to commencing construction?
Correct.
And then subsequent to that approval, prior to commencing construction, you all anticipate having an amount set for the bond and having the bond placed before, I've said it twice, but before the construction begins?
Correct, and then that will have to be renewed every 5 years,
Okay.
the amount.
And that's item J, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is it your experience, consistent with the question that I was asking Ms. Ray, that the cost of decommissioning is significantly more expensive than the salvage value of the materials that
Yes.
are removed from decommissioning?
Yes, that's my experience.
Okay. And so it is a positive bond amount, it's not a negligible amount or a zero amount?
That's, yeah, correct. my
That's been
experience.
your all's case across the projects that you've worked on?
Not every project, but most.
It's not like we're missing the value of, the value of facilities that somehow we should all get in the decommissioning game, that it's somehow more valuable taken apart than it is put together?
Your statement is correct. I would say that it would be a net positive bond.
Okay. And then finally, the geotechnical analysis. You've heard questions about that today.
Yeah.
Are you aware whether there's been any geotechnical analysis of the karst, the possibility of karst on this facility property?
Yeah, I think as Joshua stated, we have a geotechnical report for the soil characteristics and the, I guess, subsurface characteristics of the site. We have not done a specific karst study itself.
Okay. And do you all have internal requirements about what to do should you find karst features?
Yeah, so best practice was given as a response to one of the, I think it was the first round of questions. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I guess my direct question is, we've got best practices, or we've been told that you all have best practices. The question I have is, are you all stating that you intend on implementing those best practices to the T, specifically, should you encounter those situations?
Yes, our response in here should be our commitment to finding karst features and doing what was in our response.
Okay. Deputy Secretary, do you have any questions, follow up on that?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Price, do you have any redirects?
Nothing for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Stimson.
Thank you.
Ms. Price, you've heard all the testimony today, the questions. It sounds like a couple have been referred to other witnesses.
I think it was just about the number of inverters, and I can put that in the post-hearing data request.
Do you intend on calling either of those two witnesses, given the questions that were asked today?
We'd be happy to call Mr. Chernowitz for the limited purpose of answering any inverters questions.
Well, you call the witness, I don't know if you can limit the questions that we have for him, but.
I do believe that's the only question I have. We could take care of it pretty quickly.
Okay.
We'll call Mr. Colin Chernowitz.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
Absolutely.
Please have a seat. State your name and address for the record.
Colin Chernowitz, 1306 Confederate Drive, Locust Grove, Virginia, 22508.
Ms. Price?
Mr. Chernowitz, by whom are you employed?
AES Clean Energy,
And what's your title?
Director of Construction.
Can you tell the siting board what your involvement is with this project?
Generally facilitating staffing and construction according to design and plans set forth.
That's all I have for this witness.
Ms. Temple?
And I guess if you could just state how many inverters will be used for the project?
I believe the number is 15 inverter stations.
And then I guess if there's just any other kind of site description that you want to provide that hasn't already been provided.
I mean, I'll answer any questions that I
don't
can.
have- I don't have any other questions.
Deputy Secretary, any questions?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Montgomery?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
So I had a question earlier. Do you all plan on exclusively using central inverters? You also intend on using string inverters?
Generally central.
Well, okay, what, but which,
As far, the plan as I know now is central.
there is no plan at this point to use string inverters, is that right?
Not in any drawing I've seen.
Okay. And do you all, is that usually the case? Do you all almost exclusively or primarily use central inverters for these projects? Well, let me ask it this way. When would you use string, in what situations would you prefer string inverters in very specific very specific issues or broadly across an entire project?
Very specific.
Okay.
Smaller,
And-
broken up tables and things like that, where
So what
tractors don't
causes you
facilitate.
to have to-
Right, condensed sites and things of that nature, right?
Okay, when you just don't have an opportunity to use central inverters? Or as many as central inverters?
But, yeah, if blocks are smaller or you can't get full tables due to motor sizes and things of that nature, constrained tractors and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of asked, because we're doing 50 megawatts on 230.6 acres. That feels like a constrained site to me. I know it's not a small site, but constrained, I think, is a fair. Is that the type of thing, the use of string inverters, what's often used when you start running out of room to locate as many central inverters?
No, we generally don't use string inverters at all because we can usually, we buy the land that the sites and tables will usually fit in, where they're not themselves condensed, so it'll usually fit and work, into the work.
Okay, and then just finally, the pads or bases that central inverters are located on, can you just quickly explain to me what you're looking at in terms of, is it concrete, is it lifted, is it on the ground, how deep is the concrete, if it's used, what kind of foot size in terms of relative to the central inverter, how big are the pads?
That varies per project. I believe on this project, I believe it calls for skids, I believe, because it's driven piles.
Okay.
So those would be, there's, I think, 14 on the smaller ones and 16 on the larger ones, or within 2 or so. The piles are driven, capped, cut, welded, and then a plate, generally a steel plate is set on top, which holds the inverter and transformer.
Okay. And then finally, I'm just curious from your perspective, you may know this, you may not. Largest solar project in Kentucky is 10 megawatts at this point, right? It's 10 megawatts co-located with a tiny little battery. None of the facilities that we've given construction certificates to, merchant facilities, have been built yet. Duke has the Crittenden facility that was talked about earlier. They have less than 10 megawatts, but they're broken up between like 2 and 3 megawatt projects. I say all this to say, in the event there's an issue with inverters, central or string, in the event that some of these facilities have batteries, we don't have a single fire department in the state of Commonwealth of Kentucky that has significant experience in these types of things. Is there a distinction between using like a ground pad or what you're talking about, which is the steel pilings, for purposes of should there be an electrical fire, for how they should be treated, the distinction between the two? Because I don't know that we often see these skids, and it's not, at least it's not been described as such in the previous applications, many of them that we've received. Are they treated differently? Are they significantly different in how they interact, whether they're placed on skids or placed directly on the ground on pads?
I mean, I'm giving you my opinion, obviously, but I would look at them pretty much the same, because generally when they are put in through piles and on the metal surfaces, they're surrounded by earth on slopes and everything for access and entrance and egress into them for safe operation, safe fixing, repairing, and God forbid if something happens like that. So essentially it's the same.
Okay. And why the use of skids as opposed to other facilities?
Much quicker building.
if you can imagine skids are, brought in as a completed unit. So they're just, they're literally, you set your piles, you do your underground cabling. So that's all in and out of the way, and then you can just drop the units on there and wire them up.
Okay.
Or some combination thereof, too.
Okay. Oh, I did have one question. I don't know if you're the person or not. We were talking earlier, I was asking, I think, Ms. Ray, about the location of conduit to a certain depth. It's above the 4 feet. That was what I was asking her about. Is there a reason that you bury conduit at all? Is there a reason it should be at approximately 3 feet? I'm just curious. Talk about these things on a pad. It's not necessarily insulated, going up to inverters, for instance. And where I've seen panels before are in areas in which winter is not the same as it is here, I guess I'd say. So I'm just curious of, shallow trenching, deep trenching, no trenching at all. Is there a distinction for electrical purposes?
NEC code dictates 99% of what we do and how we do it. We do use a lot of direct bury and as well. So it depends on conditions. What the subsurface conditions are.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any redirect?
Nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else, Ms. Price?
We have just 1 second, please, Your Honor.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, that is all that Pine Grove Solar has to present today.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll just let you know, as a post-hearing data request, and I'll speak with council after, I have a significant number of questions regarding the corporate characteristics of Pine Grove Solar, whether they have an ownership interest or a membership interest in any entity, who has a membership or ownership interest in them, and then frankly, given the positioning of AES Clean Energy as the sponsor of a number of witnesses, as well as AES Corporation, some sort of documentation that shows the connection between the corporate structure between AES Corporation, AES Clean Energy, and Pine Grove Solar LLC, including what interaction or what relationship there is to Sustainable Property Holding LLC. As part of all those questions, also part of the questions I had today was a follow-up to the initial application and all of those, I guess I would call them statutory requirements that are necessary to answer, that were all, I don't know the individual's name, I had it up here earlier, but the individual who confirmed all of those.
Ms. Carroll?
Thank you. The regulation says that anybody who provides those responses shall be subject to questions regarding them. So my question to Ms. Carroll as a post-hearing data request is going to be, to what entities was the affiant referring to in responding to, item number 11, record of environmental violations, in which the response is referring to nor any entity with ownership interest, and to refer to that corporate structure and indicating that response. Whether it's a direct member, whether it's all the way up to AES Corporation, whether it's halfway up, and then what the discerning, or what the reasoning was for stopping at whatever level the applicant stopped. And then finally, I'll also have a post-hearing data request on question I was planning on asking today is to the follow-up to the question that Mr. Stimson could argue or answer was based on anticipated financing, to what entities does Pine Grove Solar LLC anticipate being transferred to, and will its member manager stay the same or change pursuant to that expected financing, change of ownership, change of membership? We've seen it all over, where sometimes just a tax entity is added as a member, and then sometimes it's a complete transfer. So we'll, of course, provide those filings. So pursuant to the regulation, you will have the opportunity to file a brief, I think 7 days following the hearing. That's, of course, separate from post hearing data requests that we'll have to get out. Ms. Temple, when would you be able to have the post hearing data requests?
I was going to request Friday.
That'd be fine. So this Friday is the 28th.
Yes.
Mr. Price, how about till May the 12th to respond?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. It's my understanding, Ms. Temple, that the statutory date for this is
May 30th.
May 30th, so it doesn't give us a ton of time. But if you can get those responded to by May the 12th, that'd be great.
We'll do that.
Is there anything else, Ms. Temple?
Yes, sir.
Anything else, Ms. Price?
Nothing further.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.